Okay. Um, I am the Director of Engineering at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and today I'll be talking about HTTPS Everywhere and the future of encryption on the internet. I apologize in advance for any technical difficulties involving my toddler. I had to shift around my schedule a bit, so I apologize for that in advance for any pauses. In 2021, we finally encrypted the web. Something special kind of happened here that Aaron had a lot to do with. And it was a project that I would like to think that was, near to him since he led the port for this particular project onto the Chrome store. For those who don't know what HTTPS Everywhere is, it's a project that the EFF had started in 2010. And it was a web extension that helped supported you going from insecure to secure on websites that supported HTTPS versus HTTP. And at the time, it was a very short list of websites that actually supported HTTPS. It was led by efforts like Peter Kleski and others, and Chris Palmer, who had worked on it. And it was an endeavor at the time that seemed a little out of reach. Since not many websites and services supported this, there was many arguments actually at the time that didn't support TLS, such as cost and computation time, etc. We had led 3 projects actually, HTTPS Everywhere, which was the web extension that helped users. Let's Encrypt, which was the free CA or certificate authority that EFF helped found with others like Mozilla and other partners as well. And then Certbot is the project that I run that helped people automate getting these free certificates from Let's Encrypt. And so it was kind of like a nice trifecta here where we supported the technology, we helped users access the technology without thinking about it, and we provided the infrastructure for the technology to exist. There was different browsers at the time, but pretty much the same pot as today of Firefox, Chrome, and others like Microsoft's flavors of browsers that happened over time. And it was Edge, now that was called what used to be Internet Explorer, taking that place. But Chrome is the market share that is the most right now in terms of browser usage. So the port to Chrome was very important since Chrome is such a large market share of the browser market and what users use usually by default other than Safari. So in November 2020, leading up to encrypting the web, Firefox, after discussions with us at the EFF and others, they finally deployed something, and we're the first browser, at least the first mainstream browser, to deploy HTTPS only mode, which is based off HTTPS Everywhere's ease mode or encrypt all sites eligible mode, where it completely supported HTTPS by default versus the other way around. So when you went to an insecure site, the browser started to let you know about it if you were in this mode and could turn it on. At first it was experimental, but now it's like officially a setting in the browser, and Firefox, among the bigger market share browsers out there, was the first to deploy it. And I say mainstream browsers because there were other browsers like Brave and others who were on this already. Tor as well. Tor browser actually packaged HTTPS Everywhere inside the browser for many years, up until this year, actually, because of the fact that Tor is based off Firefox late term support edition. So now that settings there, they could use that for themselves as well without having to package the HTTPS Everywhere extension. So this was kind of like the first domino fall in a good way. So March 2021, from 2019, almost a year into me taking the role at EFF as a staff technologist, all the way through 2021, was me kind of like just periodically bugging people at Chrome who worked on the security portions. I'm pretty sure they're sick of me, but either way, they helped even forge a path to make it an easier way to finally investigate in making HTTPS by default. So at first, they had a setting where, you know, it would try HTTPS at first, not necessarily enforce it. And so that was March 2021, and that was kind of like their way in their browser clearing the path. But it wasn't quite what we wanted just yet. It was trying HTTPS, but it wasn't allowing the user to enforce it. But this was a good first step. In April 2021, HTTPS everywhere, even though we saw browsers starting to adopt it, we wanted to prove even more that, you know, casting a wider net in terms of supporting HTTPS by default would be a good solution for all the browsers. So we actually partnered with DuckDuckGo in April 2021 because the extension itself actually kept a list of rules for each site that was very granular, actually, for a very long time. But as you can imagine, in the beginning, when this extension came out, like I said, it was a handful of sites that supported this. But then over time, as Let's Encrypt and Certbot made TLS much easier, or HTTPS much easier, what ended up happening was this list got really, really large. And so instead of collecting a much larger and longer list for us to keep maintain, we actually partnered with DuckDuckGo to kind of just use their listing, which was much more efficient in certain ways, and kind of have like a blanket setting as well that we actually adopted a few years earlier, where you have a better set of lists of top million sites that support HTTPS, so casting a wider net instead of collecting a list over time. And we also had a setting that enforced HTTPS, using both allowed us to push and display a proof of supporting this by default rather than the other way around. So finally, around like June, July, something interesting happened. So I say other browsers in the system, but many people may not know this. Chrome has a open source portion of their browser called Chromium, and Chromium is what Microsoft Edge is currently based off of, and so is other browsers like Brave. So Edge actually was first in the Chromium ecosystem to adopt the HTTPS everywhere mode before Chrome. So I found that very interesting. And not too long after, about, I would say a month later, Chrome announced that they would support HTTPS by default, which was big because, like I said, Chrome accounts for a large portion of market share. So this was kind of like that last piece that needed to close in the browser ecosystem, and now all mainstream browsers support HTTPS everywhere. So we're actually sunsetting the extension by January 2023. So I'm in the process of doing that. I'm still communicating with browsers about different features that the extension had that people may miss if this extension goes away. But at least at the very basic, the setting is there by default in all major browsers. So this is one of those quiet internet wins that kind of went by, I think, but I personally celebrated. I actually had a bottle of champagne myself, because it did things and helped make security by default in a way where people didn't have to think about it. We won. You know, we encrypted the web, and Aaron helped do this by porting HTTPS everywhere along with others onto Chrome, and kind of using that proof of concept over time, showing people, showing the browsers in particular, that it doesn't have to be hard. So we encrypted the web, clap, all that. And the impact of this, if you're wondering, is so a lot of people talk about the hacker in the cafe threat. And now that HTTPS is more pervasive and present among web services, that threat isn't as high. One of the things I think about all the time is using Wi-Fi that was available in different businesses when I was a teenager, when I didn't have internet at home. And I didn't want that threat to exist for people going forward, where you're just trying to access the internet to do what you need to do, and you have to worry about a hacker in every corner, you know, like, or at least a hacker in the sense of someone being malicious, right? Because I consider myself a hacker. It's a broad term, but usually when people think about hacker, they think about more malicious intent. So that whole hacker in the cafe looking at everybody's traffic in Starbucks, isn't as easy to do now that HTTPS is more widespread. I think it accounts for over 80% globally of traffic, if not higher. Authoritarian and totalitarian governments have to work harder to inspect users' traffic now, since HTTPS is the default in many ways, and they're becoming very creative in the way that they do that. But they also, were the proverbial hacker in a cafe kind of thing, where they could just inspect clear text traffic versus having to now do other things and have other mechanisms in place in order to do that. VPNs, they still serve a purpose, right? VPNs, even though there's a lot of conversations around which VPNs are good or better, or which protocols are better around VPNs or virtual private networks that people use for various reasons, they're not as required for encryption anymore, which I think is a good thing. Now, privacy and anonymity is another discussion. But as far as wanting HTTPS by default, it's something you don't really have to grab and turn on anymore, thankfully. And even though numbers may vary between desktop and mobile services, I will say, even as someone that inspects mobile traffic often on different applications and devices, HTTPS is still enforced in many ways. So that's something that I feel like is a huge impact. TLS is free and scalable now, due to these discussions around the Encrypt the Web initiative at EFF, especially with Let's Encrypt and Certbot at play. And it's security that users don't really have to opt in to think about anymore. There is a setting in browsers to enforce HTTPS, but as far as, sorry for that. As far as, having to turn on a setting, thankfully, HTTPS is so ubiquitous that you may not even really need it from the day-to-day. Like, you may encounter an insecure link from time to time. But in this case, thankfully, you don't need to depend on a third party to help you get there in terms of security as much. So what's next? So we tighten and we protect the ecosystem, right? So there's different arguments at play around what it means to have encryption in different various contexts. For a long time, encryption was seen as something that only people with really high threat models needed. But we see now that, especially with corporate surveillance at play, we do need encryption in all contexts to help people feel safe, feel private, and use the internet. I want people to have nice things. I want people to use technology without having to think about some, ubiquitous big brother searching and looking at all their traffic and using it all to sell information about them. I want people to have nice things. So a part of having nice things, I think, is messaging. Something that we encourage at EFF is end-to-end encryption on all types of messaging, especially Twitter DMs. And we've been asking about this for some years, for Twitter DMs to be encrypted. And now people may see why we were asking that more than ever, right? So especially with mobile messaging systems, there's been systems out there that's already been implemented, like WhatsApp is end-to-end encrypted, especially Signal is end-to-end encrypted. And we think that should be something that's default across all platforms, because you never really know what's going to happen or change with the service. So I think having messaging and encryption at EFF, we encourage it. So that's something that could tighten the ecosystem, encourage even further. And also at EFF, we want to support next iterations of security on the web. Now that we finally got TLS and we finally have that together, and we finally have it more mainstream on the web, now it's time to talk about next iterations of different protocols. So I talk about different things. I won't get into the alphabet soup of protocols and security too much here. But now, when I had talked about governments, governments being a little bit more creative with internet traffic and inspection. So we actually been seeing, especially with the people over at UNI, that study censorship on a network level in different countries. So we've been seeing different protocols that could help actually privacy on the web being blocked in various instances, especially with the recent uprising in Iran. We're seeing DNS over HTTPS being blocked. We're seeing HTTP3 being blocked, which supports TLS with the Quick protocol. We support other things like seeing better VPN protocols. A VPN protocol that's been very popular is called WireGuard, but WireGuard is easily blocked. So we have to get creative on our end on how we can bring these technologies to other spaces in the world that may not be able to access them or the governments are blocking them. And there are actually efforts in play to do that. We actually recently wrote a post on our site about how Snowflake is being used to access Tor, and Snowflake is another tool or system that's built off of something called pluggable transports, where it helps people to access Tor without necessarily the third party snooping in on the network, knowing that they're using Tor, or being able to block wherever they're trying to get their requests to in particular. So we have seen creative ways where governments are trying to block these sort of like more advanced types of supported and private and secure methods of the web. And we're going to keep watching these and see what can we build in the future to continue to help people, or support what projects out there can we support that helps people maintain anonymity, privacy, and security on the web. So that's my talk for today. Thank you for listening, and I want to say thank you, Aaron. I never really personally knew him, but I knew his story, and I know people that have worked with him here at the EFF. And I would like to think that me working on the HTTPS Everywhere project and helping bring that to a close is a good thing and a good way to also tie to his legacy. Thank you for listening.